evening. Welcome to the Pearl Report. I'm Diana Lin. The Philippines is still reeling from the horrendous devastation of Typhoon Haiyan last month. Many scientists have linked the superstorm to global warming. Producer Renato Reyes examines why experts say it's time Hong Kong starts preparing for the full onslaught of climate change.
On November 8, we had this super typhoon which hit the Philippines, particularly the central part of the Philippines. Waters developed to big waves around 20 feet.
This is my father-in-law, and he's still missing until now, and we are searching for the body. And this is my son Schwartz. This is all we have for now.
The casualties run through about 5,000.
I have lost everything, the house.
Displacement of people was really huge.
It's the worst thing we've ever seen.
And experts say climate change is aggravating the frequency and intensity of severe storms like Haiyan.
Of course, we're not entirely sure. The science of climatology is very complex. But I think we have to be prepared for more typhoons and typhoons that will cause more damage. We are on a typhoon track and we are surrounded by sea.
But can Hong Kong take on the super typhoons of the future? Typhoon Hagpit is the strongest to hit Hong Kong in 29 years. The typhoon whipped up a storm surge of 1.4 meters at Tai O, one of the biggest in Hong Kong history.
Hong Kong will normally have a storm surge of about less than 1 meters, or under the extreme cases of 1.4 to 1.7 meters of storm surge.
This is Hong Kong's first line of defense.
The most common type of sea defense structures in Hong Kong is the seawall, breakwaters, and typhoon shelters.
Officials consider them adequate to protect the city except for one fundamental flaw. Its design doesn't factor in what is now making storm surges bigger and bigger. Rising sea level.
The sea level has risen in Victoria Harbour, and the rate of rise is about 29 millimeters per decade.
The climate is projected to get warmer by 2 to 4 degrees Celsius in the next 100 years. The hotter it gets, the more glaciers melt and waters warm up and expand, the higher the planet's sea level.
With an elevated sea level, the threat of storm surges will increase, and so Hong Kong is vulnerable.
Last year, the government started reviewing Hong Kong's maritime defense. A study this year by its consultants shows Hong Kong and Kowloon's coastal frontages, as well as its northwest side, are vulnerable to flooding if sea level rises 1 meter, along with a 1 meter storm surge in high tide. The design of coastal structures will depend on projections for sea level and other data in the next 100 years.
Only after carrying out these studies can we determine what coastal structures in which areas we have to defend against climate change.
Climate change is now inevitable. How do we adapt to the inevitable consequences of climate change in the future?
The adaptation takes the view of a constant awareness.
His job is to update every year the risks climate change poses to the MTR.
We're looking at higher storm surges, more rainfall falling in a shorter period.
The MTR runs along slopes, through tunnels, goes underground, and near water.
The worst case for the MTR would be flooding, similar to what had happened for the New York City Transit Authority due to Hurricane Sandy. That kind of closure in Hong Kong would be unacceptable. But we make sure that the drains, the pumps are all in working order.
As well as drains and slopes along MTR tracks.
We make sure that there's nothing blocking them as well.
Because of threats of landslides. Typhoon Hagapit precipitated 38 landslides,
which closed the expressway but didn't impact the railway. So if it's happened once, it could potentially happen again along the North Lantau Expressway.
An average 2,400 millimeters of rain fall on Hong Kong a year. As the planet gets hotter, more water from oceans evaporate and goes up the atmosphere and turns to rainfall.
This is the record of hourly rainfall at the Hong Kong Observatory. You can see that this record is broken more frequently in recent decades.
We're looking at how is that going to impact our business.
Shirley Elgaya, Chief Sustainability Officer for Gammon, a construction company that does 70 projects a year in the city.
Prolonged periods of it can slow down construction, such as in June of 2008. And it was like raining almost 45 days straight in Hong Kong. And that did slow down some production.
Especially the most weather-dependent phase, concreting.
It's very difficult to make concrete move. Now, the traditional technology has been to use external compaction, something called vibrator.
Gammon has turned to technology for solution, smart concrete. It requires no vibration to settle, flows farther, and needs 40% less manpower to lay down. Special chemicals mixed in cement makes the particles push away from each other.
Take Shanghai Towers, the tallest building being built in Shanghai right now. It had a foundation almost the size of a football field. They had to place 60,000 cubic meters of concrete in one day. 10,000 trucks of concrete.
But global warming's biggest impact on construction companies is the hot spells projected to scorch Hong Kong, especially those up on heights and on the ground.
We do everything.
Cam has been a construction worker for 10 years.
I work on high places less. I work more on the ground. When it's hot, of course, you feel tired easily. Your working ability diminishes.
Our annual temperature is also rising. In the last 130 years, the rise is about 1.5 degrees Celsius.
A recent study by the Construction Industry Council shows more accidents among workers occur in summer months between June and August.
Over 50%. In 2013, for the industry, between January and June, there were 3 fatalities. When you look at July, there were 5.
Hot spells could lead to fatigue, fainting, and heat stroke.
Then that leads to other accidents. They can drop things, back injuries, muscle injuries, or just a loss of awareness, so that you might get more bumping into things.
The company now mandates rest breaks for workers during hot spells and provides shelter for them to hydrate, as well as nurses on site.
Every single week, maybe we go out for like 4 to 5 days to visit different sites.
More vulnerable than al fresco workers are people most sensitive to heat. Lam Bik Ping, 78, suffers from high blood pressure.
I call the alarm service to ask the nurse what's today's temperature.
Lam uses an emergency healthcare hotline run by a charity organization.
We get around 3,200 to 3,400 calls per day. The number of calls would increase by 10 to 15% during adverse weather conditions.
A recent study shows hotline calls peak when temperatures reach 28 to 32 degrees Celsius. 49% are for dizziness, shortness of breath, and general pain, mostly from women aged 75.
There will only be more and more hospital admission and help-seeking behavior with climate change.
Professor Emily Chan of Chinese University is the study's author.
If the daily temperature on average reaches the 29 degrees Celsius, then I guess the hospital system, our frontline service, social medical service, should start to prepare that they should expect more people will call for help.
To adapt to global warming, the hotline center increases manpower by 10 to 15% during hot spells. It's introduced as well this gadget that measures the elderly's blood pressure and automatically uploads it to the call center via internet every time they use the device.
During hot summer or even during cold spell, the blood pressure level of the elderly would either increase sharply or drop. If the readings exceeded the normal threshold, our in-house nurses will contact our service users to make sure that they are in good condition.
Next, after the break, living and dying in the age of global warming.
Which species can cope and which ones can't cope?
Who is going to be the winner? Who is going to be the loser?
Stay with us. Welcome back to the Pearl Report. The world is getting hotter due to global warming. So how will rising temperatures impact Hong Kong's native animal species? Renata Reyes reports scientists fear some of the city's marine creatures will become locally extinct. Lau Fao Shan, a village in Yuen Long famous for its main attraction.
Oyster farming, and there are many people especially come here for getting the oyster.
Ginger Ho is a marine researcher here to get samples of Hong Kong's native species of oyster, Crassostrea hongkongensis.
I normally come here and get oyster for our experiments.
The Swire Institute of Marine Science on Cape d'Aguila is studying Hong Kong oysters after farmers revealed a curious phenomenon.
They are smaller in size, and they are also struggling for the survival.
The quality of meat is not the same as they were seeing before. It's not tasty.
That is the Hong Kong local oyster. We will get the adult oyster, and then we will take out the sperm and the eggs from the females and the males, and to mix them in the water to create the larvae. The larvae will develop after 24 hours.
We have a carbon dioxide.
Carbon dioxide is pumped into these jars of seawater to culture the larvae.
To mimic how they can survive under global climate change conditions.
Seawater replete with carbon dioxide is causing a huge environmental disaster that could wipe out many marine species worldwide in the next 100 years. Ocean acidification.
Our Victoria Harbour already saturated with carbon dioxide.
The more fossil fuel Hong Kong burns, the more carbon dioxide it emanates into the atmosphere. A third of that is absorbed into seawater.
This is the global average, 380 parts per million. Our carbon dioxide over 600 ppm, which is extremely high.
Carbon dioxide alters the chemistry of seawater, making it more acidic. pH is a measure of acidity. The lower the pH, the more acidic the water. The global average of the planet's ocean is 8.1 pH.
It is already 30% acidic than 100 years ago.
The seawater is 7.9 pH. It's acidic partly due to pollution from the Pearl River Delta.
Extremely acidic than global average.
Dr. Tia Garajan heads the experiment.
This is the controlled current seawater condition. So the pH you see 8.1. Within 100 years of time, you see your pH is decreasing. It's already 7.5. The larvae are growing there. So we're just studying them how they are growing and under this low pH conditions.
Scientists observe the larvae's first 15 days.
They do form shells right after 6 hours from fertilization.
But in the acidic water, scientists find the larvae are struggling to grow shells.
They take 2 more days to grow to the same size of the oysters that is being grown in normal conditions.
Oysters stay in the water for the first 2 weeks before settling on a rocky surface for the next 4 to 5 years.
If they stay more in water column, they might have high chances of being eaten by animals. This will in turn slow down the population at the ecosystem level. We are looking at the proteome of the Hong Kong oyster larvae.
The DNA of its protein. All oyster species have a breaking point when they can't take the acidity anymore and die. There are 3 main oyster species being farmed in the region: the Portuguese oyster from Taiwan, the Pacific oyster from Japan, and the Hong Kong oyster. These 16 water tanks have various levels of acidity.
We have 16 scenarios for them to choose. See which is the best condition for them, which is the tolerable level, at what pH they collapse, who is going to be the winner, who is going to be the loser. If we go below 7.7, which is what we are expecting in next 100 years of time, you lose your Hong Kong oysters because they are highly sensitive to small changes in the chemistry. The Pacific oyster and the Portuguese oyster can tolerate much lower pH than Hong Kong oysters. So, for example, Hong Kong oyster will die at 7.4 pH, but they won't die. In the United States, in Europe, Canada, oysters are already declining. Oyster industries in US collapsed.
I traveled to the northwest coast of US to see what is happening over there. The pH of the water is acidic. And when they pump these acidified waters to the hatcheries, they can't get a full yield production. The larvae still dies. They don't know what is happening.
At any time it may happen to China as well. We just simply don't know when.
China supplies 70% of the world's oysters. 30% of them are Hong Kong oysters.
90% of the larvae die before they reach adulthood. That's just the nature. So we can't afford to increase this number to 95, 96 because of the extra carbon dioxide we are producing in the atmosphere. There's millions of villagers' livelihood depend on these oysters. If we know how to save this oyster, then that means we are saving millions of poor fishermen.
Rajan and his team are helping oyster farmers alter water chemistry to the optimal level for culturing larvae in hatcheries.
We can add a lime into it, dilute the acidity.
How about the city snails and mussels?
So here are some of the snails which we're working on.
Swire Institute of Marine Science Director Gray Williams is studying whether snails on the shore could survive a warming planet and at what temperature.
Which species can cope and which ones can't cope. This is what we call an eye button. Basically, it's a data logger that you can actually record temperatures with.
The button is put inside an empty limpet shell. These robo-limpets are placed on the shore to record rock surface temperature, the heat snails and mussels feel inside. Hong Kong averages 28 degrees Celsius in the summer, but these snails can bear twice that temperature on the shore.
They can tolerate rock temperatures of over 50 degrees Celsius. The tide drops, they sit down, seal their shells, to seal the water resources they have, and so they can survive being out of water for days on end. They just feed when the tide washes over them.
Hong Kong snails can beat the heat, but how about its native mussels?
Hi Michelle, how's it going?
Increasing the temperatures and see how their heart rates will increase with the temperature.
This is the black mussel and the green-lipped mussel. Both are exposed to different air and water temperatures. A sensor is attached to their hearts.
There's another beat, there's another beat. As they get hotter, their heart rates will increase. But we can also detect at which point the heart starts to fail. The heart will start to beat irregularly, or it'll start to slow right down. That means the animal is starting to experience stress.
And the loser, the black mussel, dead at 40 degrees Celsius.
We have die-offs of this animal that take place in the summer because we do get rock temperatures which exceed the tolerance limits.
He believes the black mussel is already retreating northward towards Japan and predicts it might become locally extinct in the next 20 years.
It'll be too hot for them and they won't be able to replenish themselves after a kill-off in the summer months. Lots of animals live amongst the mussels. If you remove the mussels, you remove a lot of those animals. So again, you lose biodiversity.
The good news, this seafood staple is here to stay.
The green-lipped mussel, I think that will actually become more predominant because it likes the hot weather.
Would Hong Kong's butterflies still be around in the next century?
Oh, where'd they go? They all disappeared. Butterflies, their upper thermal tolerance isn't very flexible.
In one experiment, a heated wire is inserted into the thorax of a butterfly to measure how much heat its body can take before it dies.
When the body temperature of a butterfly goes past roughly 40 degrees Celsius, give or take, they'll die.
Tim is doing research in the field to back up a theoretical model he'd done that showed butterflies in the tropics were more vulnerable than those in colder areas.
The most negative impacts that we project here are occurring in the Amazon basin, for example, in the Afrotropics and in Southeast Asia. You can see here the Indonesia, and Hong Kong is actually right in the margin of the tropics. If you can imagine an organism living in a hot environment like the tropics, they're going to be closer to that maximum physiological limit. If it's hotter than basically their maximum thermal limit, a lot of species can't tolerate warming past this limit, even 1 or 2 degrees of warming, because it's so hot already.
His study will take decades, but it's the first step in a long journey to chronicle a looming environmental catastrophe.
Most butterflies live most of their lives as caterpillars, an important food base for birds, mammals, lizards. Will lose the species that depend on them.
Well, thank you for watching our show. It will be re-aired on Tuesday and Saturday, as well as on tvb.com. Until next time, from the Pearl Report team, good night, good luck, and good health.